Imagine for a moment that you wake up one morning, step outside your home, and the land beneath your feet has disappeared underwater. The road where children once played is gone. The fields that fed generations have vanished. And everything you built in a lifetime is swept away overnight. For millions of people in Pakistan, this is not imagination, it is reality. Floods have not just drowned villages, they have drowned dreams, opportunities, and sometimes even hope. But here is a question we must ask ourselves. Are these floods truly just a natural disaster, or are they the result of choices? Choices made by governments, by societies, and by the world as a whole. Because every disaster tells us a story, not just of nature's power, but also of human responsibility. Today, I want to take you on a journey, not just to understand Pakistan's floods, but to see the bigger picture of how global climate injustice, poor planning, and cross-border politics have turned nature's challenge into a man-made crisis. And more importantly, I want to show you why this story matters, not only for Pakistan, but for every single one of us sitting here. Stay with me until the end, because what you will discover is not just about one country suffering, it is about the future of our planet, the responsibility we share, and the opportunities we still have to change the outcome. And yes, in the end, you will see why leaders like Imran Khan continue to inspire hope in people, proving that even in the darkest floods, the light of resilience and vision can guide us toward a better tomorrow. When we talk about floods in Pakistan, the first and most undeniable factor is the role of climate change in intensifying their frequency and severity. Pakistan is among the top 10 countries most vulnerable to climate change, even though its contribution to global carbon emissions is minimal. This imbalance reflects the harsh reality of climate injustice. Nations with the least responsibility for global warming often bear the heaviest cost. Rising global temperatures have accelerated the melting of glaciers in the Himalayas and the Karakoram, which feed Pakistan's river system. This accelerated melting not only increases water flow during the summer, but also disrupts the natural rhythm of rivers, creating sudden surges that overwhelm dams, canals, and flood barriers. At the same time, changing monsoon patterns have become unpredictable, often bringing either devastating downpours in short periods or prolonged dry spells that weaken the soil before the rains arrive. The combination of glacial melt and erratic monsoons has created a dangerous cycle where Pakistan faces both floods and droughts, sometimes within the same year. This unpredictability leaves little time for communities to recover from one disaster before being struck by another. Farmers who form the backbone of Pakistan's economy are particularly affected. Crops are washed away, soil fertility is lost, and livestock perishes, pushing rural populations further into poverty. Beyond agriculture, floods devastate infrastructure, roads, bridges, schools, and hospitals, setting back development by years, sometimes decades. Urban areas are not spared either. Climate-induced heavy rains overwhelm drainage systems in major cities, causing urban flooding that paralyzes economic activity and endangers lives. Moreover, these disasters cannot be seen in isolation. Climate change is not just about more rain or rising temperatures. It magnifies existing weaknesses in governance, infrastructure, and planning. In Pakistan's case, every flood season becomes more destructive because climate pressures are growing faster than the country's ability to adapt. Global reports have repeatedly highlighted how South Asia, particularly Pakistan, is entering a new era of climate extreme, where past data is no longer a reliable guide for the future. This reality forces us to question whether the suffering of millions during floods is purely natural or partly a result of the world's failure to curb emissions and invest in resilience. The link between melting glaciers, changing weather systems, and unprecedented rainfall events makes it clear that climate change has turned floods from seasonal challenges into existential threats for Pakistan's future. Another critical factor behind the devastating floods in Pakistan is the widespread deforestation and the lack of proper urban planning that has unfolded over decades. Forests act as natural buffers against floods by absorbing excess rainwater, stabilizing soil, and slowing the flow of rivers and streams. However, Pakistan has one of the highest rates of deforestation in South Asia. Trees are cut down for fuel, construction, and urban expansion, leaving the land exposed and vulnerable. Without forests, rainfall flows unchecked into rivers and low-lying areas, carrying soil with it and increasing the risk of landslides in hilly regions. This soil erosion further clogs riverbeds, reducing their water-holding capacity and making them more prone to overflow during heavy rains. At the same time, rapid and often unregulated urbanization has compounded the crisis. Cities have expanded without long-term planning, with housing colonies, markets, and even industrial zones being built on natural waterways and floodplains. When monsoon rains arrive, these encroachments block the natural drainage channels, forcing water into residential areas and turning cities into flood traps. Karachi, Lahore, and Islamabad have all witnessed this phenomenon, where a single day of heavy rain results in roads submerged, power breakdowns, and widespread chaos. Poorly designed drainage systems are either clogged with waste or completely inadequate to handle today's extreme weather patterns, leading to prolonged urban flooding. Adding to this problem is the culture of short-term construction without environmental considerations. Developers often prioritize immediate profits over sustainability, building concrete-heavy landscapes that prevent rainwater from seeping into the ground. As a result, rainwater collects on surfaces and moves swiftly toward lower areas, creating sudden flash floods. In rural areas, riverbanks and wetlands that once absorbed seasonal floods have been encroached upon for agriculture and settlements, removing another natural line of defense. This unchecked interference with ecosystems is not simply an accident. It is a man-made vulnerability that magnifies the destructive power of floods. These issues highlight how human decisions have turned natural rainfall into deadly disasters. While climate change determines the intensity of rainfall, it is deforestation and poor urban planning that decides the scale of damage. Every illegal housing project built on a water channel, every tree cut without replacement, and every drainage system left unrepaired contributes to the tragedy we see during flood seasons. It is not just nature acting on Pakistan, but also Pakistan's choices in how it treats its environment and cities that shape the outcome of each disaster. One of the most pressing challenges that intensifies flows in Pakistan is the chronic problem of water mismanagement. The country depends heavily on the Indus River system, yet the infrastructure built to regulate and store water is both insufficient and outdated. Pakistan has very few large dams compared to its population and agricultural needs, and many of its existing reservoirs are silting up due to poor maintenance. This drastically reduces their storage capacity, leaving the country unable to capture excess rainwater during heavy monsoon seasons. Instead of being stored for later use, massive volumes of water rush downstream, unchecked, inundating villages, destroying farmland, and sweeping away infrastructure. The irony is that while Pakistan faces devastating floods in one season, it suffers from severe water shortages in another, showing that the real issue is not the availability of water, but the lack of systems to manage it effectively. Irrigation practices also reveal deep inefficiencies. Pakistan's irrigation system is one of the largest in the world, yet it is plagued by outdated canals, water theft, and poor distribution. Large amounts of water are lost through seepage and evaporation before they even reach the fields. In flood seasons, these weak canals are often breached and their embankments collapse, allowing uncontrolled water to spread across agricultural lands and settlements. Farmers suffer the most, losing both their crops and their means of livelihood. Furthermore, the absence of modern flood roller structures such as spillways, levees, and flood diversion channels leaves the country exposed to the full force of seasonal torrents. Urban water management is equally inadequate. Cities rely on drainage systems that were designed decades ago for milder weather conditions. Today's reality of cloudbursts and prolonged downpours overwhelms these outdated systems within hours, turning roads into rivers. Solid waste mismanagement compounds the crisis as drains clogged with garbage prevent water from flowing freely, intensifying the scale of urban flooding. The lack of investment in stormwater management means that cities are repeatedly paralyzed by heavy rains, causing not only economic loss, but also serious health risks from waterborne diseases. The issue of water mismanagement is more than a technical flaw. It reflects broader governance failures. Without political will, long-term planning, and investment in modern infrastructure, Pakistan will remain vulnerable to floods. It is not just the force of nature that brings destruction, but the absence of foresight and responsibility in handling one of the most vital resources for the nation's survival. Beyond climate change, deforestation, and internal mismanagement, the floods in Pakistan also raise questions linked to cross-border water politics. Pakistan's river system is largely dependent on waters flowing from India under the Indus Waters Treaty of 1960, a landmark agreement that has so far prevented outright water wars. Yet tensions remain high because water has become not only an environmental issue, but also a geopolitical one. During periods of heavy rainfall, sudden upstream water releases from India can create severe surges downstream in Pakistan. While such releases are often explained as technical necessities to prevent dam overflow, in Pakistan they are sometimes viewed with suspicion, seen as deliberate actions that worsen flooding during the monsoon season. These concerns highlight how the line between natural disasters and political maneuvering can easily blur when rivers cross contested borders. The Indus Basin, home to millions of people on both sides, is extremely sensitive to how water is controlled and shared. For Pakistan, which is already struggling with limited water storage, receiving unregulated surges from upstream becomes catastrophic. Villages along the Indus and its tributaries bear the immediate brunt, with homes swept away and fertile lands submerged underwater. Each time such an event occurs, it fuels public debate within Pakistan over whether floods are solely an act of nature or partly influenced by external decisions. While the treaty outlines water-sharing arrangements, it does not address modern climate realities or the increased variability of river flows caused by glacial melt. This gap leaves room for mistrust and political exploitation. The issue extends beyond Pakistan and India, as the Himalayan river systems also connect to China and Afghanistan, making regional water management a broader challenge. With glaciers melting at an accelerated pace, the stakes are growing higher for all countries that depend on these shared waters. In this context, the question of whether Pakistan's floods are natural or man-made is not just about climate change or domestic governance, but also about how fairly and transparently regional powers manage shared resources. The lack of cooperative frameworks for disaster management or flood forecasting between neighbors worsens the situation, leaving millions vulnerable every monsoon season. Ultimately, water in South Asia is both a lifeline and a source of insecurity. In times of flooding, it becomes clear that politics cannot be separated from nature, and that the suffering of ordinary people is often caught between environmental forces and geopolitical rivalries. The floods in Pakistan are not only an environmental or political issue, they represent a massive humanitarian crisis that touches every aspect of human life. When floodwaters rise, they do not just wash away homes and infrastructure, they also strip millions of people of their dignity, security, and future. Entire villages are submerged, forcing families to leave everything behind and seek shelter in makeshift camps, where overcrowding, lack of sanitation, and limited access to clean water create conditions ripe for disease outbreaks. Cholera, malaria, and dengue fever often spread rapidly after floods, turning an already devastating situation into a prolonged health emergency. Hospitals in affected areas struggle to cope, either because they have been damaged by the floods themselves or because they lack the resources to handle such sudden surges of patients. For those displaced, the crisis does not end when the water recedes. Livelihoods are destroyed as crops are wiped out and livestock is lost. Since agriculture employs a large portion of Pakistan's rural population, floods often mean not only hunger but long-term economic displacement. Families who lose their income sources are forced to rely on aid or migrate to urban centers, creating further strain on cities that are already overwhelmed. Children are particularly vulnerable in these situations. With schools damaged or converted into relief shelters, education is disrupted for months, sometimes years, leading to long-term setbacks in learning and development. This creates a cycle where the next generation faces fewer opportunities to escape poverty, perpetuating the impact of floods far beyond the immediate disaster. Women and marginalized groups often suffer the most. In displacement camps, the lack of privacy and security exposes women to greater risks, while cultural norms sometimes restrict their access to aid and healthcare. The trauma of losing homes, loved ones, and a sense of stability weighs heavily on communities, often leading to mental health struggles that remain unaddressed in relief programs. The psychological scars of surviving a flood can last a lifetime, yet they are rarely spoken about in the broader conversation. Economic consequences are equally severe at the national level. Infrastructure like roads, bridges, and power stations requires billions in repairs, diverting resources from development projects and pushing the country deeper into debt. International aid may provide temporary relief, but it cannot replace the long-term economic loss caused by repeated disasters. In this sense, floods are not isolated tragedies. They are ongoing humanitarian emergencies that compound existing vulnerabilities, making recovery a challenge that extends far beyond the disaster zone. The reality of Pakistan's floods cannot be understood without looking at the intersection of global responsibility and local accountability. On the global stage, Pakistan is a victim of climate injustice. Despite contributing less than 1% to global greenhouse gas emissions, it consistently ranks among the countries most affected by climate change. This disparity exposes a fundamental unfairness. Industrialized nations whose carbon-heavy development paths have fueled climate disruptions bear responsibility for the extreme weather events devastating vulnerable countries like Pakistan. Calls for climate reparations and loss and damage funds highlight the need for wealthier nations to provide financial and technological support to countries facing disproportionate climate burden. Yet international aid often comes slowly, in limited amounts or tied to political conditions, leaving millions of Pakistanis waiting for relief while their lives and livelihoods hang in uncertainty. At the same time, it would be unjust to frame Pakistan's floods solely as the outcome of global negligence. Local governance failures play a decisive role in turning natural disasters into national catastrophes. Corruption, poor planning, and weak implementation of policies have left infrastructure fragile and institutions unprepared. Flood protection embankments are often poorly maintained, warning systems are underfunded, and development projects ignore environmental sustainability in favor of short-term gains. Even when international funds are allocated for climate adaptation, mismanagement and lack of transparency frequently prevent them from reaching the most vulnerable communities. In this sense, the suffering of millions is not only the result of global emissions, but also of local choices and priorities. The balance between global responsibility and local accountability is delicate, but essential. Pakistan cannot tackle climate change alone, nor can it afford to rely solely on external aid. It must strengthen its governance systems, invest in resilient infrastructure, and enforce strict environmental protections. At the same time, the international community has a moral obligation to recognize its role in creating the climate crisis and to assist vulnerable nations with meaningful support. Floods in Pakistan are therefore both a reminder of shared global interdependence and a test of national responsibility. They force us to confront the uncomfortable truth that disasters are rarely just natural events. They are shaped by a complex web of global inequalities and domestic failures that determine who suffers the most when nature strikes. Ladies and gentlemen, when we reflect on the devastation caused by Pakistan's floods, one thing becomes clear. These disasters are never the result of a single force. They are shaped by climate change that the world has collectively unleashed, by human decisions that cut down forests and block natural waterways, by weak governance that fails to prepare for predictable dangers, and by regional politics that complicate an already fragile situation. Each flood is not just water flowing over land. It is a reminder of global injustice, national responsibility, and the urgent need for change. The story of Pakistan's floods is therefore not only about destruction, but also about opportunity, an opportunity to rethink how humanity treats nature, how nations support one another, and how leaders prioritize the safety of their people. If the global community recognizes its shared responsibility, if Pakistan strengthens its systems of governance, and if together we act with foresight rather than reaction, then these tragedies can become turning points. They can push us toward building resilience, sustainability, and fairness in a world where climate extremes will only grow more common. So as we conclude, let us carry forward this message. Disasters may be inevitable, but devastation is not. The difference lies in the choices we make today, in the courage to confront uncomfortable truths, and in the willingness to act, not tomorrow, but now. I wish you all the best as you continue to think, learn, and act on these pressing issues. Thank you for your time, your attention, and your commitment to building a future where humanity does not merely survive disasters, but rises stronger from them. Good luck and thank you.